Right, I want to welcome everybody to this 4 o'clock session titled Digital Twins, Using Virtual Platforms to Better Understand Existing and Future Conditions. My name is Elizabeth Daniel. I'm going to be moderating this session before I turn it over to our two speakers, Jim and Julie with the City of Raleigh. I just have a couple of housekeeping items I want to go over. I am going to be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to send your questions through the chat window. We're going to save about 5 minutes at the end of the presentation so that I can send those questions to our speakers. Please be aware, you probably heard this a million times already, but you do have to click the chat button and actually join the chat in order to log in. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our two speakers and give them a chance to introduce themselves, Jim and Julie.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I'm Jim Albert, GIS and Emerging Technology Manager with the City of Raleigh.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Karamala. I'm one of the Enterprise Senior GIS Administrator at the city.
And before we get started, I wanted to kind of highlight two things that happened recently. One is that the Mars rover landed successfully. We're pretty excited. It landed about 5 minutes ago for us nerds. And two, neither Julie or I have a cat filter on. So we're very excited that we at least got through that part of it. So a little bit about Raleigh. So for those of you who are not familiar, Raleigh, capital of North Carolina, just under 500,000 people. We have about just under 4,000 full-time employees. Our budget across both capital and operating is about $1 billion. And we're about 150 square miles, so fairly large city. So I moved to Raleigh about 7 years ago. And one of the things that attracted me, I came from Boston, is that Raleigh was a really, really fast growing city. I was astonished. My sister had lived down here. And every time I came down, I was amazed at how much development activity was happening. And you know, some of the statistics that I wanted to kind of share with you are between 2010 and 2016, basically the equivalent of the town of Apex moved into Raleigh. That was the population growth that we had in Raleigh. In addition, as you can see on the map, not only is Raleigh growing at a kind of phenomenal pace, but also 6 of the top 10 percentage-wise fastest growing communities in the state are in Wake County. So this population growth adds a whole bunch of pressure to the services that we provide. And, you know, on the GIS team, we think that we add a lot of value and to creating better services or more efficient services. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about today is that development causes pretty phenomenal changes in the physical landscape of our city. And so just trying to get a sense of what that means using a digital twin platform is kind of what we're going to talk about today. So before we get into the details, and Julie's kind of leading the effort on the technical side, and she's going to share a lot about that, I wanted to kind of share how this fits into what we're doing across the city. So it's not just some kind of skunk works operation that's happening in the back room. We're trying to align some of these things with not only the larger IT, but also the city strategy. So recently, the city adopted a new 3-year strategic plan that has a bunch of key focus areas and initiatives underneath those key focus areas. And if you read that smart citywide strategy, you'll see that smart cities is kind of laced throughout the strategic plan. In addition to that, our IT strategy is kind of aligned with that. So we're, as an IT organization, trying to support the citywide strategic plan. And then we have a smart city plan that kind of helps to support both of those. Within that smart city plan, we talk a lot about things like trying to make sense of vast amounts of data using analytics, real-time data, et cetera, and digital twin kind of fits underneath that. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie to talk about what we're doing with digital twins, and then I'll kind of circle back to this at the end.
Everybody, so I'm going to take you into the world of digital twin. A digital twin is a virtual representation of the real world, including physical objects, processes, relationships, and behaviors. And it can be used to solve different kinds of problems like maintaining a historical record, operational performance monitoring, or to test and predict future performances. So we at the City of Raleigh, we are creating a virtual environment to better understand existing and future conditions. And we didn't have to start from scratch. As part of Envision project, we worked with NC State University to build a 3D based map of the city using 2015 LiDAR data. So our first activity was to update the data with 2019 building footprints. We identified a few other activities as part of this digital twin journey, and I'll talk more about them in this next few slides. So a digital twin can be used to represent current, past, or future state of assets. What you're looking on the screen, it's not just our existing buildings, but you're looking at projects that are approved, projects that are under construction, and pending projects. So, I mean, this kind of helps you to visualize the project citywide. Let me pause it. So, yeah. So, I mean, you're looking at a bunch of buildings on the screen, but I must mention that the source of the data and the workflow followed to create these 3D buildings are so unique. For instance, these buildings that you're seeing in the center of the downtown area, so they were created using 2015 LiDAR data, and pictometry oblique images were used to create these detailed textured buildings, so they resemble the real buildings on ground. And then we had these untextured building outside of downtown area, which we used a realistic rule package to get it a textured building on those buildings. And then, of course, you're looking at these colored floor plated buildings. So they are symbolized based on space uses. And the data for that, we are getting it from development services. And the interesting thing is when, let's say a project is approved and development services, they update their data, that should immediately show up in this virtual environment. And of course, a big shout out to my coworker, Katie Isles, who spent a lot of time on these future developments. Now, there are many use cases to maintain future developments in a 3D environment, but I want to share a very interesting use case with you all. So Myra Corporation identified City of Raleigh and New York City for one of its research efforts. So they are investigating how micro weather in a city might change street by street due to changing climate conditions and advanced urbanization. So one of the requirements was to capture all individual buildings expected to be built by 2030. And we were excited to support them with the data.
Another use case that that was personal to me was, as I mentioned at the beginning, I had started with the city about 7 years ago, and the City of Raleigh offices are downtown. And when I first started, right out the window, there was a hole in the ground. And me being a very curious person, wanted to know what was going to happen in that parcel. And so we've been working for a while to try and share this sort of information with just curious constituents and citizens who are interested in what their neighborhood or what their city is going to look like today, tomorrow, next week, next year.
That's a good start for my next slide. So one of the benefits of having a 3D virtual model of an asset is that 3D experiences can provide a customer level experience for interaction and exploration. So you're looking at a BIM model of a project that's still under construction. And a BIM model is pretty common these days with developers. So imagine if the city received 3D BIM models along with 2D data for approval. I mean, as you can see on the screen, with a BIM model, you can visualize floor by floor. And not just that, these BIM models are so detailed, you can identify locations of light bulbs or underground planned utility electrical lines. And I mean, you can click on them in an underground mode in this virtual environment, along with these buildings, and compare it with a new existing building nearby. And you can use shadow tools to see the shadow impact on buildings nearby. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is a 3D building allows you to visualize, but also you can analyze and maybe use it for decision making too. So another activity, another project we worked on was on growth capacity analysis. So you are looking at New Bern Avenue study area. This is one of the 4 key corridors of our BRT bus rapid transit project, which is expected to be completed in 2030. And this path basically connects downtown Raleigh to Wake Med here and New Hope Road. Now you can imagine the number of site acquisitions and the amount of planning that's going to happen in this area. So as a proof of concept, we use ArcGIS Urban's growth capacity analysis tool to intelligently select parcels for development in this area. So we worked with our planners to identify criteria to score and prioritize site for acquisition for the development of affordable housing and for economic growth opportunities in this corridor. So they came up with around 20 variables or criteria. As you can see on the top left, the criteria were like parcels that fall within a quarter mile of the new BRT stations, or parcels that are adjacent to a parcel owned by City of Raleigh. So we use ArcGIS Urban's policy validation tool, or PVA, as they call it, to score these criteria and weight them based on the priority to prioritize these models. By running the model, these parcels got symbolized, and as you can see on the screen, the ones that are green are highly suitable, and the ones that are in gray are unsuitable. And not just that, we were able to use the place type allocation tool to allocate building types to these selected parcels. So for instance, you could say like, out of these selected parcels, allocate 40% for retail, maybe 25% for multi apartments, residential. So based on the allocation, the dashboard gets updated and spits out some capacity metrics on population, household, jobs that would be created, and trips that would be generated. So yeah, I mean, this was so basically we were able to use those metrics. I think this is a good time for me to go to my next slide, but I just want to add one thing, that behind the scene for this particular study area, we did some spatial joins to for these variables, but we are ready to run this tool for this study area. And we can run this tool for any area in the city because the data is ready and the model is ready. You can add and delete variables, but we are ready. All right. So this is a good time to talk about capacity indicators. But I have a quick disclaimer. I'm not a planner, but I've heard that planners spend a lot of time calculating these capacity metrics like population, household, jobs. So ArcGIS Urban easily generates these numbers. So this feature was a big hit with our planners. But we wanted to compare the metrics generated by Urban with one of the community that was planned by our planners. So we basically imported parcels from Rhino. That's the software they use for their planning, 3D modeling. So we were able to import these parcels into ArcGIS Urban using City Engine and generated these numbers. Now, I want to mention here that at this point, Urban doesn't allow you to have like these shaped buildings that you're seeing on the screen. And it comes with some building templates. Now, City of Raleigh has these unique building types like parking wrapped residential building, which means you have two different space uses on the same level. But anyways, for this particular proof of concept, we were able to split these parcels and import them into urban and generate these numbers. And the numbers matched pretty well with the planner's numbers that they had calculated. So we were able to basically define urban as part of their planning process. So they can continue their planning process in Rhino, but when they're ready to look at these capacity metrics, they can bring it in urban and generate these numbers, especially with the Pro Urban Connector tool. The workflow is so much easier. Okay, I'm going to talk about one of my interesting activity in digital twins. But so before we started discussing digital twins, way before that, our partner Raleigh Water, they had already started working on vertical asset management for their water and wastewater treatment facilities. So basically, they had already worked on the data that they wanted to collect for these assets, and their data schema was ready, but they were looking for a web form to collect data. And my coworker, Justin Greco, he developed a custom web form to basically filter out these data when they're collecting data. So for instance, if they are at building A and it has 3 floors, then it would just show up 3 floors in the form. So this form did a great job collecting data, but it was all in a tabular form. And there was this need to plot these assets so one could select an asset and assign it for, let's say, for work activity in city works. So they were in search of a new solution for mapping indoor spaces. And that seemed to coincide with our effort in digital twin. And we evaluated ArcGIS indoors, and which meant, of course, deploying and implementing the entire enterprise system and a portal site exclusively for indoors. As you can see on the screen, on the top left is Raleigh Union Station. So basically, you can route within the building between points of interest. And on the top right, you're looking at the integration of CityWorks with ArcGIS indoors. Bottom left is one of Raleigh Water's facilities, which is mapped using ArcGIS indoors. And they're currently using ArcGIS field maps application, which is which has these floor pickers. So if your data is, aligns with the AIIM model, then you should have the floor pickers in place to collect data. I think I'm good, and I'm going to pass it on to Jim for the next slide.
Sure, but before I go on to that indoors project is fascinating, and Andrew Hayes and Lee Kimmel tomorrow will be doing a presentation at noon. I'd encourage you to go check it out. So to wrap it up, so Julie kind of gave a really good overview of kind of our digital twin activities, and under the umbrella of smart cities, we're doing a couple of other things that I mentioned at the beginning, including machine learning, real-time analytics, data processing, all sorts of things. And we think that each one of those is interesting, but the real value is when we kind of bring them together. So I would encourage you to think, one of the things that we think about is, imagine starting to model the machine learning within this digital twin environment, or process this real-time data in this digital twin environment. So that's where we're headed. We're trying to advance on all of those kind of threads, but also look to kind of join them together. And then lastly, just to kind of wrap up, is this, you just heard from Julie. We're lucky to have her. She mentioned a bunch of other folks, Katie, Kristen, and Justin. We work pretty closely with our CityWorks team. We have a great partner in Raleigh Water that's internal to the city. And then we have a couple of external partners that we've worked pretty closely with over the last few years. So we did an early project with NC State that was very successful. We work pretty closely with Esri and Sanborn on the data side. And so we just feel lucky to have kind of really smart people and really good partners. think that's it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank
Happy to
you.
answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much. That really is some exciting stuff that you guys are doing. And I do want to let people know that the chat line is open for questions, so please send your questions through the chat if you have any.
If you don't, I will start looking for my cat filter.
I'm still not seeing any questions, so Jim and Julie, I'll kind of leave it up to both of y'all. If there's anything else that you kind of want to mention or cover, we do have a couple of minutes, or we can stay on the line and read for some additional questions, but I'll leave that up to y'all. And close if that works well for you.
I have a question for Julie. So Julie, what was the most rewarding part of kind of the activities around digital twin?
I think working with so many different people with, such different experiences. I'm not a planner, like I said, I've got to work with planners. I've learned a lot about planning, and again, with the, for vertical asset management, such interesting conversations. I mean, I wanted to say this, but we didn't have time, so I can tell it now. So, like how the collecting data and using field map apps for that. And there was this question about what if the data is collected, assets collected, but it gets moved from building A to building B. So, I mean, there's so many solutions that suggested, like attribute rules and the webhooks on feature services. I mean, I can keep talking about technology, but really interesting, such interesting topics.
And for the folks who are still listening, there is an interesting opportunity. So I think it's NC Riot is the name of the organization. They are putting out, they just recently received a grant to do a call for pitches for AR related projects. And there's some criteria about it needs to be relevant to benefiting the community, et cetera. But I'd encourage you guys to look at NC Riot and a call for pitches around augmented reality.
We do have a couple of questions that have come in. First, I want to say we do have, Caitlin says, very cool. Thanks for the presentation. Connie has a question about what software was involved.
So ArcGIS Urban, ArcGIS Indoors, Pro.
And then you also used a little bit of City Engine, and we were getting some data from Rhino.
Oh yes, City Engine, that's right.
We have another question from Campbell. This one is, will this be useful for stormwater management and stream restoration? I missed a couple of minutes for dog management, so I think they missed part of the presentation. But they're asking if this is going to be applicable to stormwater management and stream restoration.
Yeah, so I mean, the answer is yes. The idea of a digital twin is creating a virtual digital environment in which to be able to run scenarios and models. And that is stormwater management is about understanding current conditions and future conditions as it relates to normal kind of precipitation and abnormal precipitation. So we think it is. And so, one of the things that Julie is doing is pushing the envelope and trying to, right now, with a planning kind of lens, but I think that there's all sorts of environmental lenses. She had mentioned the project that we're doing with MITRE around microclimate and micro wind shear kind of modeling. I think this is kind of dipping our toe into the modeling that I think the question is kind of pointing to.
We have one last question. What real-time data sources are you using for analytics?
Yeah, we actually have a pretty significant inventory of those. So we have everything from trash cans, parking meters, bikes, scooters, all of our vehicles. I'm sure there's another set of them, but those are the ones that kind of come to the top of my mind when we talk about the real-time data that we're processing. And then there's, in addition to that, we're starting to get into machine learning. Specifically, it relates to image analytics. So looking at our traffic cameras to start to detect traffic counts, object detection, etc.
Do you have time for another question? This is from Ken. How much of Raleigh do you have modeled? Just downtown and selected corridors?
I'll let you answer that one, Julie.
Yeah, so the entire city, like in the model, yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to thank you both so much for your time. This is some really fascinating information. And I want to thank everybody else for attending. And I hope you have a good rest of the conference. If it works with you guys, are you ready to end, Jim and Julie? Is there any last thing you want to add?
We're all good. Thanks so much.